Okay. I affirm the resolution that this House would push Morgan off the bridge. I'm not going to read the resolution. I put it in the chat. It's just going to take a long time. So to clarify, under our side of the House, we are choosing to kill one person and choosing to save 3 people. We believe that this House should be defined as a rational individual, and we also think that this round works better when we exist under the assumption that everybody in, like, Morgan, Finley, Harley, and Riley, we're assuming that all of them are pretty similar people, that they're all good people, they're all, nice and normal people with the capacity to live life, love and experiences, all of those things, and that not one of them is some evil person. We believe that this is a value round, and you should be judging this on what you think is a morally just decision. And we believe that you should be weighing this round on utilitarianism, whatever provides the most amount of good to the most amount of people overall. With that, I will be getting into our arguments. Our first advantage is that saving the most lives is the most important thing. What can we see right now? First is that life has intrinsic value. We live to have experiences. Having experiences is our purpose in this world. And living is the mechanism for us as human beings to experience things and to have experiences. Two, our lives are not our own. We alter other people's experiences. We affect the value of their life. While I am in this debate round, and that is my experience, me being in this debate round rather than somebody else is altering the human experience of every single other person here. 3, by killing somebody, we make a decision for every single other person in their life. This is because when somebody dies, it is irreversible. Nobody can get them back. So by deciding not to save 3 people's lives, you are making that decision for every single person in their life, because they will never be able to get that loved one back. 4, for the purposes of this round, killing somebody and not saving somebody are the same things. Inaction is action. Because of one's decision not to act, 3 people die if we don't push Morgan off the bridge. This is the same as if you made the conscious decision this is the same as if you made the decision to kill one person or Morgan. So what happens by pushing Morgan rather than not doing anything? The first thing that happens is that by making the choice to push Morgan, we are saving 3 people. The second thing that happens is that we are allowing 3 more people to have the capacity to live and experience life. We are allowing 3 more people to fulfill their purpose on this earth and to live a long and fulfilling life. If we don't do this, we are depriving these people of not being able to fulfill their goals, to not being able to fall in love, to not being able to have the family that they always wanted, to not being able to reach their career goals. And by saving them, we allow 3 more people to experience these things. The third thing that happens is that we allow the families and the loved ones of these 3 people to continue to have them in their lives. Without pushing Morgan, you would deprive these people's families, you would deprive these people's loved ones of the opportunity to have dinner with,
Would you push Morgan if Morgan was your mom?
Would I push, we're in this round, we're existing under the framework that all of these people are pretty similar. And so this question is pretty irrelevant to the round. Okay, so you're depriving people's loved ones of being able to experience them. You're depriving their mom from seeing them graduate. You're depriving these people from resolving a fight with their close friend that they had right before this moment. You are depriving them of every human experience that they deserve to have. And by pushing Morgan, you are allowing 3 more people and 3 more people's loved ones to exist with them in their life. 4, you also deprive, or you also allow those people in these people's futures to experience them. By not pushing Morgan, you deprive more people of experiencing these people in the future. So you are depriving these people's future soulmates. You're depriving these people's future children of being able to experience these people and being able to have their love in their life. And by choosing to push Morgan, you are allowing more people in the future to be able to experience these three individuals. So the impact of this is that we are minimizing death on our side of the house. And we are allowing these people to continue to have experiences. We are allowing those in their future to continue to experience them. And we are allowing their loved ones to continue to have them in their life. So our second advantage is that on our side of the house, we minimize grief. First, we can see that having loved ones die is an absolutely tragic experience. It is something that affects people for the rest of their life. Whenever they hear their name come up, it hurts a little bit more. It can also send people into spirals of depression and addiction. The second, we can see that a lot of the time death makes irreversible impacts. If people develop a drinking problem because their mom died, that is something that is irreversible. You can no longer cure an addiction once it is born. It can also lead to things like chronic depression that just cannot be cured. The third thing we can see is that the day that loved one dies is the worst day of the people in their lives' life. Having people's child die is usually a parent's worst fear. If you think of your worst fear, you're going to think, it is my parent, my boyfriend, my best friend, my child dying. Fourth thing we can see is that in this situation, people are going to grieve on either sides of the house. If you push Morgan or if you decide not to save three people. So we simply want to minimize this grief. So what happens when you push Morgan? Well, the main thing is that fewer people die and fewer people grieve. We are minimizing grief. So the impacts of this, you'll see less sadness, less depression, less mental health issues, and less irreversible impacts like addiction. So for all these reasons, I urge a government ballot. Thank you.
All right. Is everyone ready? The order is going to be framework, my own case, and then opponent case. If everyone is ready, then I will begin time. I will begin time now. Imagine you're walking one day and you're with your mom. You pass by a train track and you're going over a bridge. Choo-choo, and then you push your mom off the bridge in order to save three people. Would you say that this is a moral action or something that you would actually perform as a person? My opponents fail to address this kind of issue, but instead try to dance around it by saying that we have framework that fundamentally excludes all of these issues. They say our framework means that everyone is the same age, everyone is of the same, everyone is the same of everything. But it makes no sense if we're talking about a debate of morality. Is every single circumstance made of every single the same type of person? We can't actually really analyze a moral issue if we're only looking at people when they're the same age, they're the same religion, they're the same race. If all of these things are going to say that, oh, they're the same in this particular dilemma, then how do we actually come to a moral absolute? My opponents say that this is a value debate, but they make it impossible to evaluate it as a value debate if they say that we're only analyzing one circumstance of this specific issue, because we're not actually looking at whether or not this is a moral thing. We're looking at a very acute scenario that doesn't actually paint a portrait for the entire whole. And that's one of the fundamental errors of my opponent's case. They make this assumption that everyone is the same and everyone's going to have the same impact and the same effect, or that all emotions are the same. But that just simply isn't true. Furthermore, they can't show why this is a universal thing, or why exactly utilitarianism needs to apply to every circumstance. And for those reasons, I'm going to present my own framework right now. For our value, we're going to be using justice, which is whether or not this action is wrong. I would argue one of the most important things in justice in this round, and I think it's kind of given from the resolution, which we negate, about whether or not we would push Morgan off a bridge, is that we need to decide whether or not the individual is actually culpable for the action. Do they deserve blame for what happened? I think that's the most important part of this decision-making process. Is this a just scenario, and is the person just for pushing pushing someone else off the bridge. And that requires a little bit more inquiry than just saying that everyone is the same and analyzing it as a scenario where, again, everything has the same circumstances, because that's just not how morality works. And it makes us impossible to make a moral conclusion. And our value criterion for this debate is going to be the categorical imperative. This kind of ties into the absolutes, that we're basically, this is a Kantian idea that in the categorical imperative, if you're going to make a rule for something, it has to be the rule in every single circumstance. And my opponents make it impossible to evaluate this kind of deontological process, because not everyone does something for the same purpose or has the same feelings attached to something. For example, in this train experiment or the trolley experiment, you would say that I would also kill my mom or push her off a bridge because I follow this moral absolute. If this rule cannot be applied in every single circumstance, then it cannot be deemed moral, because how can it be moral if you wouldn't apply it to every single person in every single circumstance? We have to be able to come to that kind of moral absolute to actually make a decision in today's round. So even if you are apprehensive about even one idea about today's round or circumstance in which their examples make no sense, or pushing Morgan off of a bridge would actually be an immoral action or something that wouldn't be justified in your own mind, then at the end of the day, side negation wins, because they cannot prove that it is an absolute thing that we should push Morgan off the bridge in every single circumstance. All right, now let's get on to the debate. The first argument from the side negation is that you would never push a loved one off a bridge. It would complicate the entire thing. First of all, pushing someone off a bridge is hard enough in the first place. Most people in the world say that they wouldn't push someone off a bridge in order to save other people, because you absorb personal culpability. You're actively murdering this person. But when it's someone you love, say your mother or your father, someone in your family, or maybe even your wife or your husband, this becomes a little bit more complicated. Would you find it just in yourself to be able to push someone you loved off a bridge? It wouldn't be just in every single circumstance, at least to the person who is doing it. You absorb some more individual culpability when you do those things, because you do have a personal relationship. They never say that they make the assumption that everyone is a stranger. So obviously, in some circumstances, this would be unjust, because not everyone is a stranger and you may have personal relationships with this person. Secondly, our argument is that murder is always wrong. Something they say is that, like, it's murder if you have inaction. Can they tell me any legal code or any philosophical code that says inaction equals murder? They don't give any example in which history inaction has actually equaled murder. Like, how does that make any sense? Like, if I didn't do something and I knew someone was going to die in the future, like, if I didn't actively like run over there to save them, am I personally responsible? Am I responsible by the law? Am I responsible by any philosophical creed? They give no value in today's round to evaluate why murder is right in this specific circumstance. We argue by the categorical imperative because situations have shown that murder is always wrong. In the law code, if you murder someone, it's always wrong. Then that is the issue. Inaction is never tried for. We've never had a jury trial about having inaction or doing nothing about and having inaction actually leads to murder. There just isn't any actual precedent for this. They don't show any philosophical idea of why this would happen. They don't give any examples. Why exactly should we believe that murder is right in this specific scenario when every single other scenario in the world, when every single other legal code says that it is wrong in every circumstance? So they don't provide this idea of why it would be right here. And even if they were to provide one scenario, would it actually negate the idea that in most scenarios, at least, it is an immoral thing? There is no way for an affirmation to actually overcome this burden, because they don't provide a value that accurately actually shows you how they would come over this moral absolute. And our last one is kind of an example of how when you apply this to every single circumstance, it simply doesn't make sense. Saving one person for the whole is not always a just action. For example, say you're a surgeon and you have three people who are missing one person is missing a lung, one person is missing a kidney, and one person is missing a heart. And you have a healthy person in the other room. Would you perform surgery on the healthy person and remove all their organs and give it to the three people who need organs in order to survive to actually save them? When you have that kind of blame on yourself, it complicates the entire situation. My opponents act like it's a black and white, like you're murdering one person or you're murdering three people, but that's not true. In this circumstance, you're only murdering one person, but at the same time, the other people die, but it's not your fault. There is no individual culpability, so there is no categorical imperative to do it, because there is no moral absolute that you should do this in every circumstance. If you were the surgeon and you wouldn't remove those three organs to give to the other three people, then you would vote for side negation, because obviously in every circumstance, it's not just to actually save 3 people over 1 person, because individual culpability ultimately in this situation trumps the saving of those lives, because you are actively murdering someone. Now let's go on to their case very quickly. First, they tell you on their framework, I've already responded to, but they also tell you in their first argument that lives are more important than anything. Well, why doesn't Morgan's life matter in this situation? I think that's something they don't pay attention to in the entire debate. They talk about how these other 3 people are affected, but what about Morgan's life? Morgan's life full of experience. What if Morgan is directly connected to you? What about her relationship with you? All of these things go away at the same time, but you also absorb the responsibility for doing that. There's no responsibility for the other 3 people because you didn't actively murder them. You didn't choose to make the train go that way. You didn't force it to go that way. Ultimately, you're forcing Morgan to die. So you are personally responsible for the loss of her life, for the loss of her experiences. That's what side affirmation proposes, where side negation says that there isn't direct responsibility for the other 3 people dying because you didn't make that happen. Secondly, they talk about how stopping people from losing 3 lives causes grief all around. How can they ever quantify grief? Like, they give no quantification. How can we compare one person's grief to another? They don't give that they don't actually give a quantifier, and why that actually how they can actually prove for that. Also, again, the individual culpability. There isn't the individual culpability for the other 3 people's grief because you didn't actively murder them. You only actively murdered Morgan. So if her family felt grief, you would actually absorb the impacts and you would actually absorb the culpability for that. So it would be an unjust action. And for all these reasons, please vote side negation. Thank you.
Hi. Sorry about that. So Kai Tagan, second speaker. Just to reiterate, there was a little bit of confusion on the first speech where POI was written. So please say something out loud if you have a POI on the speech. Okay, so all that being said, I'll start my time now. Okay, so let's talk about the framework in this debate. Now, side opposition is grossly mischaracterizing side government in several fashions. Their first fashion, they say the side government is saying that all 3 of these people are exactly the same like ethnicity, same religion. It's not about all 3 people being exactly the same. It's about all 3 people's lives being intrinsically valuable, right? That is what this debate is about. It's not about, we're not saying they're all exactly the same person. We're saying that all people have the capacity to live, to love, to experience, and that is intrinsically valuable. It's a morally unjust decision. What we're saying is that they have these things, right? And they are at least similar in terms of being like a good person, a person who can do things, right? The problem with the idea of the categorical imperative and just extending it to any examples is it can also be twisted to suit side government, right? We could say under their idea of the categorical imperative that Morgan is a serial killer and that the 3 people on the track are your siblings / best friends, right? It can always be twisted. So to be able to actually evaluate the round, you have to assume some degree of similarity between the 3 people. That doesn't mean they have to be like triplets exactly the same. That doesn't mean they have to have exactly the same religion, but it means they have to assume that all of their lives are valuable, that they are all good, right? And that in the end, it is the morally just decision to save 3 people at the cost of losing 1, right? So they're talking about how the framework should be justice, whether or not an action is right or wrong. But I would argue, first off, that utilitarianism is justice, right? We argue that it is wrong to force the forfeiture of experience upon 3 people when you could have saved those 3 people at the cost of 1 person's experience, right? That's wrong. That's morally wrong. That still fits under the definition of justice, right? The only thing that they're trying to add in is this new idea of the categorical imperative, which just simply makes it impossible to evaluate this round. Under the categorical imperative, you can't give any ground to the government, but you can't give any ground to the opposition either, because the government can always twist the case to say that Morgan is a terrible person and all the people on the track are really good people and Morgan doesn't like deserve to live. That's just not a fair way to evaluate this round, and it makes the round impossible to judge, right? So they say on our first contention that we are saying Morgan's life doesn't matter, right? That we are like losing all the people that Morgan could have been connected to. This is not at all what we were saying. Morgan's life matters, right? Morgan's life is intrinsically valuable, but the lives of the 3 people on the track are also intrinsically valuable, and it is tragic that we are losing Morgan. It is tragic that the people in Morgan's lives have to lose them too. But in the end, it is more tragic. It hurts more people for these 3 people to die than for Morgan to die. They say that we're trying to quantify grief. The grief is unquantifiable. But the fact of the matter is, we do know that people have loved ones in their lives, and that when you lose a loved one, it really, really hurts. You don't have to put a specific number on that to understand how much hurt, how much pain it causes to a parent or a loved one or a child to lose someone that important in their life. And so this idea that just because you can't put a number on something doesn't mean that it's real, doesn't mean that you should count it, simply doesn't make sense, right? So let's see. On side opposition's case, they talk about how you would never push a loved one off a bridge, right? And that like it's possible that this could be a loved one. But again, just extend everything that we said about categorical imperatives, right? Like it's you maybe they're saying you would never push a loved one off the bridge, but who's to say that Morgan isn't a serial killer? Who's to say that the three people on the track aren't your loved ones, right? This idea of like who's to say, we to consider all possible situations. I'll take your POI later if I have time, simply makes the round impossible to evaluate. So refer to what we said about categorical imperatives. Now, the next contention they make is that murder is always wrong, right? First off, they say there's no philosophical or legal code that says that inaction to save someone's life is something that is wrong, right? First off, there is, right? Like there's the legal code of manslaughter, right? If by your inaction someone died, if by you not taking the foot off the gas of your car, you crash into a building and kill a bunch of people, that is a crime, right? By the legal system, that has been deemed to be wrong. And you can also just logic out that in this case, inaction is action because it's all about the impact, right? It's all about what happens, right? Like think about this. Yes. If you push Morgan as a result of your decision, as a direct result of your decision and no one else's decision, Morgan will die and the three people will be saved, right? On the other hand, if you don't push Morgan as a direct result of your decision, the three people will die. You could have saved them. It was within your power to save the three people on the track, to save all of their families and loved ones of grief, to save their possibility to experience life, to live, to laugh, to love, to have their entire futures. That is a direct result of your decision. So it is the same. You are still causing all this pain. You are still causing all this suffering. In the end, in this round, you should be assessing based off of impact and off of what actually happens to people, real people, not some very just confusing and complicated framework from a philosopher 300 years ago. It's barely even warranted why they should be able to use it, and it means that the round is impossible to evaluate, right? I'd also just like to point out real quick, like we're providing you with a clear-cut reason why you should value people's lives, why you should value the impacts of people's lives, because that's just common sense, right? We want to help people. That's what debate is about. Meanwhile, they provide this whole framework with no real justification for why we should use it. It is the duty of the government to provide a reasonable definition, and it is the duty of the opposition, if they're going to provide a different definition, to talk about why the government's definition makes it impossible to evaluate the round, which it clearly isn't, right? So continuing to move down the flow, so also their idea that murder is always wrong, literally no matter the circumstances, also not true, right? We don't believe it's just or okay to say that a person being sexually assaulted, trigger warning, that it would be unjust for them to fight back against their assaulter. In the end, if that person kills their assaulter, it's not within our it's not our right to say that that's wrong, to say that that's unjust. They can't just make this categorical statement after they brought up this idea of the categorical imperative that says you can't use categorical statements. They're directly contradicting themselves at this murder point. Continuing to move down, they say that it would be unjust to take the organs of a person in a waiting room to save three people. But again, under utilitarianism, under the idea that this is about impacts, right, it actually would be just, right? Yes, you are ending the experience of this one person, but you are preserving the experience of three. You are like preserving all the joy and happiness and positive impact of all the people that those people ever could have experienced with, could have interacted with. And yes, it's tragic that you are taking away the capacity to live of one person, but by doing this, you are saving the capacity to live of three, right? And by doing otherwise, you are actively making the choice not to save the three people that you could have saved. You are actively forcing this decision upon all of their loved ones, upon all the people that ever could have been in their lives, right? Essentially, like, what should you be taking away from this round, right? Number one, it should be very clear that like human life is intrinsically valuable, right? It matters that these people will never be able to find someone they love or to make amends to someone they love. It matters they'll never be able to have children or to pursue their dreams or their hopes. That matters, right? That is huge. And in the end, on the government side of this debate, you're allowing three people and all of the people in their lives to experience that. You're saving that for them. You're saving their parents who otherwise would have grieved for them. You're saving their loved ones who otherwise would have never been able to forgive the fact that this happened, right? You are saving all the people in their lives in their futures whose lives you can make better, and you're saving them, right? And yes, you are ending the life of another person, but in the end, it is the morally just decision to save those people, to make more people's lives better. That is a framework you can judge this round under. That is a framework that is clear and just and rational. Do not argue under this Kantian, not at all warranted idea that we should just take every single situation, because that makes it literally impossible to judge this round, and that's not what this round should be about. This round should be about what you think is right, what you feel. That's what this round is about. Please vote for side government. Thank you so much for your time.
All right, I'm going to be the second speaker for the negation. I can begin my speech in just a second. I'm also cool with verbal POIs. Just go ahead and say them out loud. And did you guys do a brief off-time roadmap? Would that be okay?
What was that?
Could I do a brief off-time roadmap? Okay, so I'll just be briefly going over some clarifications, then going down the, I'll be going down the AF case and the net case. So if there are no objections, then my time will start now. Okay, the fundamental misstep that was made on the side affirmation today was the idea of that we are weighing on morality, and then they don't provide a sufficient way to actually do this. They say that it's morally just, that is the way that we're supposed to go. A gut feeling is how we're supposed to judge on today's debate. However, we need to think more categorically today. There needs to be an imperative of which we actually see the ways and impacts of our actions, what that carries out, the actual morality to it. We can't just say, okay, we just have consequences and that's all we're going to look at. This is a very philosophical debate today, and we have to understand that there are different degrees and levels of which philosophy actually withstands. And especially in the case, the huge debate versus utilitarianism and deontology, there is a clear winner, and it is deontology. With Kant's categorical imperative, I'm going to show you why today it is not outdated, why it's totally practical for today's debate, and why we need to vote on side negation. Now, to begin, the big issue of today's debate, which is framework. There's the idea of, okay, they create this, the first thing that was happened, I think it was in the second affirmation speech, was an actual concession to the utilitarianism framework. They say that, okay, or to the justice framework, because they say that it's a part of util, that this whatever happens in util, like that equals justice. However, util is more broad than justice is. Like you can have like any sort of kind of framework coming from utilitarianism, like any minority, since they didn't specify which type of utilitarianism that they were using, we can assume that any majority inside of utilitarianism is preferable over any minority. This obviously leads to other greater harmful impacts such as racism and other kind of ableisms, because if a majority is always preferred over a minority, then that means we're never considering the other impacts that come from a minority standpoint. And that is the case if we're too ambiguous idea of utilitarianism. Also, they don't really weigh with the utilitarianistic framework. They kind of just concede to justice and then go along with it. So I'm going to say that is probably the winner of today's debate in terms of the value that we're using. Now on to the value criterion, which is, of course, the categorical imperative versus their kind of just like weighing of under like impacts and stuff. So they present this like really wrong perception of what a categorical imperative is. They think that it's like this kind of flip-flopping philosophy. It's not. Categorical imperative implies that there's a direct rule that comes from every single type of action and whatever its consequences are. It is for the categorical imperative to exist, it means that every single rule, or for every single action, there is a rule for whether or not is actually justifiable or not. The example of, say, like a mother is just an example as to why it holds up. But to make it a little simpler to actually understand, let's go with the example of lying. Under the categorical imperative, lying is morally unjust. And this is because, as my partner stated in the definition of what a categorical imperative is, if every single person had performed that action, or if everyone like morally considered it correct and performed it, then would it create a logical fallacy? And this specific case, it does. Because if everyone, for example, lied, then that means everyone would lie, no one would trust each other. Categorical imperative stands because that individual action as a rule does not stand. It is immoral. There's like, this also further applies to murder, because in cases of murder, they also provide like this example, like what if it was a serial killer that you're pushing off? Well, then they're creating a world comparison here, judges. They're saying, okay, would you rather have a world where you killed both your mother and like a serial killer because those exist in the same morality, or would you consider it not moral to kill both of them? I mean, obviously, this is a very tough question to answer, but we are saying that is morally unjust because you cannot say that because even if you're on their side talking about like the quality of each person's life, that means even murdering one person, despite the extra topical like impacts that come from it, that specific life being lost is the action that's being performed. That's the only thing that matters, right? If we're causing the specific action, like of someone being killed, like in a murder, then that is the problem that we're presenting today. So in the categorical imperative, murder is always wrong, because any murder, or if you can come up, if they have to prove on their side, if the categorical imperative wrong, that any murder ever, every murder ever is correct. Like they had to, if there is even one objection to any kind of murder, that means categorical objective withstands. That doesn't, so that totally wipes out this entire idea that they bring up, like, okay, neutral person, neutral person, neutral person. Like that doesn't matter really in today's debate. I feel like both sides need to understand this. From a moral perspective, you need to understand morals instead of like just specific scenarios that we're creating. I think both sides need to actually present some kind of philosophical reason as to why, instead of saying just specifics and basing it off of presumptions, which leads me to my second point, which is the ideas of all the impacts that they start to bring up. So let's go down the list really quickly. So first of all, they talk about, okay, one person is connecting to all people. This is a really big topic on theirs. Now, the one person impacts the lots of other people around them, which impacts out to the entire world, right? I think that was like the phrasing that was used in the first speech. Well, let's look at it this way. If one person impacts everyone, then that means the one person that we are murdering impacts everyone as well. So if we're murdering 3 people, murdering 1 person, we're still impacting out to everyone. So that's basically a null point. It's just a wash. The only really impact part of the case that they had was the idea of grievance. So let's go on to the impact that they're trying to present, saying it's so static, it's so necessary, it's always true. Now, this isn't really the case. They themselves contradict themselves when they say that there are specific conditionalities to this kind of debate, when they say, okay, there's completely neutral people and we're not going to assume specific things about them. And then they go on to make the assumption that they have loved ones that are going to like miss them, for example. Not say, and I say this with the utmost sincerity, I'm not saying that like we have to assume that these are the worst people in the world that we are trying to, or we are weighing whether or not they actually have like, or should we like save them or not. We are seeing in this specific instance is that we cannot make any assumptions, and also basing the idea, I think it's kind of problematic to base the idea of like 3 people's lives are intrinsically valuable, more valuable than 1 person's life. Like it just, it's just a weird way to go about it. They try to apply this idea that we're not having circumstantial ideas of whether or not we're comparing these people's lives versus like whether or not we should or not kill them. And honestly, I feel like circumstances like these should just be taken out of today's debate. We have to look at it from a philosophical level, not a circumstantial one. So I'll continue to go on to the rest of the case. Sorry, that was more of like on the affirmations case. Now I'll go down to neg case, like the refutations that they were making. So when we talk about categorical imperative, again, they say that basically it just doesn't, it's not true because it's too flip-floppy. As we've proven, categorical imperative for literally every action has a specific rule or whether or not it's moral or not. And we prove that murder is unjust because in one circumstance of murder being unjust, that means all circumstances of murder are unjust. That is what categorical imperative says. The reasoning behind it is so important because from a philosophical level, we're trying to find out, as we said, using the value of justice, whether or not there is culpability. And if someone pushes someone off, then like the bridge, then it is their culpable fault. Now, a quick response as to the idea of justice that was brought up by the negation, like, yeah, we'll concede it to the idea that there are maybe say laws that prevent people or like saying like sorry, never mind, we don't concede. The idea that if someone was like in a car and they don't press the pedal, then they go and they kill someone in a building. See, the reason why this is just a logical fallacy is like you made the decision to go in the car and actually do perform this action yourself, like going with the car, perform this action. Note that in this specific instance, they're not the same as pushing someone off because you were not placed into a situation where you were already engaging in an action and now you have to just like not do it. This is a specific instance in which we are saying that you actually have to perform, you have to actually decide whether you're performing an action, whether you're not performing an action, whether you are culpable for a murder or you are not. The extra circumstances that surround it, whether or not these other people die, those are not your fault. Those have not occurred because of yourself, your own volition. This has occurred because of situations that were out of your control, okay? We have to look at the culpability of your specific fault. And since philosophy, I'm protected time, like 3 more seconds left anyways, you have to look at the morality of today's round, not specific circumstances that we're making up like on a whim. And for all these reasons, I strongly urge an opposition ballot. Thank you.
All right. I'm going to have a 4-minute speech. Off-time roadmap, I'm just going to be going framework, and then I'm going to be giving like the key points of the round and why we want them. All right. If everyone's ready, then I will begin time now. we are left with two competing frameworks. First of all, they argue for utilitarianism and justice, and we argue for justice and the categorical imperative. The key difference between utilitarianism and categorical imperative is that one actually meets the moral burden. Something in this round that my partner brought up is the idea that utilitarianism in and of itself is an unjust system. As my partner pointed out, it justifies things like racism, ableism, because ultimately it benefits the majority. It lets oppression happen because as long as it's good for the majority, the minority can suffer. It's a flawed framework in and of itself and leads to problems of the worth of value of life. Like, can we actually measure the value of life? That's something my opponents keep trying to do time and time again. But that's actually characterized by our own relationships with people. So again, refer to our case on how we talk about how loved ones in the circumstance would make differences. My opponents, again, talk about how these people, and they're talking about how they all have the same value in life. But then at the end of the day, that means all of our exceptions still stand and we still have access to our categorical imperative. Because if the ability to have mother-son relationship still exists, if the ability to say murder is wrong in this specific situation because you're pushing someone off a bridge still exists, if the ability to show our example on how a surgeon taking organs from one person to give to 3 sick people is actually shown, then we actually win this round pretty easily. And I'm going to go down that right now. So our first reason that we win, even if you value utilitarianism or like on the category, well, first of all, on the categorical imperative, is that we actually show that there is a bunch of specific circumstances in which this wouldn't actually be just. And this is something my opponents never respond to. They never actually address the issue that there are so many circumstances in which this is not just. And that is why the categorical imperative matters here, because they cannot actually make a moral absolute. The point of debate is to come to a conclusion. But if they can't come to its conclusion by basically saying that, oh, in this specific circumstance, in this specific world, this is going to happen, then we don't actually come to a conclusion. Only side negation provides the ability to actually say that this isn't a moral absolute and is thus unjust by proving that the categorical imperative should be the main weighing mechanism in today's round. And because we show these exceptions, first of all, that loved ones, would it be just to push your mother off a bridge? Personally, you would say no. This is something they never respond to the entire round, is this personal culpability point. My partner points it out. How can they actually address personal culpability when you are the one murdering them? You're literally the one choosing to do it and you are intentionally pushing them off. You're not forcing the train to go. You're not telling it where to go. You're not responsible for those deaths outside of the person you're pushing off the bridge, who is Morgan. And this person, again, you absorb that individual culpability, so you are to blame for that action. Secondly, what we're going to argue is, again, on the categorical imperative, is that there are a lot more circumstances. For example, on the surgeon example, if you were a surgeon and you were to take organs from a healthy person and give them to 3 sick people, that would be unjust because, again, you're literally taking this person's life actively and giving it to other people. Is that a just thing? And are you okay with absorbing that individual culpability? At the end of the day, value debate and philosophical debate ask you to ask those questions of yourself. Would you be willing to do these things? I mean, given the moral ideas that we give you, would you be willing to do these things? And would you be able to do them in every single circumstance? Judges, if you believe that you would, and ultimately categorical imperative takes action here, because there is circumstances in which you wouldn't do it. So there's no way to give affirmation the win on a moral absolute, because there's too many circumstances in which people wouldn't be able to do it that actually justify side negation, showing that it is an immoral action. They keep trying to quantify grief, but they give no example of how many loved ones people have or how we can actually measure grief in the first place. How do we quantify any of their impacts? They give no way to compare it, even under a categorical imperative. Even on a utilitarian standpoint, they don't give a way to quantify these impacts. How can they quantify the worth of someone's life? I mean, at the end of the day, are they playing God? Can they quantify the lives of these people? Can they quantify the grief that people feel? They can't do that. So categorical imperative is the pragmatic option in today's round for framework, and we easily win that because of the exceptions that we show in today's round. And for all these reasons, please vote side negation. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to just start. The first thing I will be discussing in my rebuttal is framework. We believe that you should be evaluating this round based on everybody's life in this situation, Riley, Morgan, all of them being valued equally. All of these people are of equal value in society and to the actor. If you do not do this, it is absolutely impossible for you as judges to evaluate the round because it just turns into a he said, she said thing. We can say Morgan's a serial killer. They can say that Morgan's your mom, and both things, they skew the round in directions really dramatically. So in order to evaluate this round in a logical way, we can assume that Morgan isn't our mom. Morgan isn't a serial killer either. Morgan is a neutral person that has just as much value in society as you and I do. Now, secondly, I will be getting into why utilitarianism is the best way to evaluate things in this round. We present to you that by using utilitarianism, you're maximizing happiness. Our purpose in life is to have experiences that make us happy. And by maximizing experiences, we are maximizing happiness on our side of the house. They say that utilitarianism doesn't consider the minority standpoint and it's unjust. However, if you use utilitarianism, all it is doing is saying that we're creating a society in which happiness is always worked to be maximized. That is all we're saying. We're not saying that minority standpoints don't matter. We're saying that society should always work to maximize happiness. Now, in real life, it is very uncommon to have situations where you have to kill somebody or else a bunch of other people will inevitably die. However, we think that when you are in this situation, you should try to maximize happiness. In a pickle, in a situation where you're told that you either have to kill somebody or else 5 people will die, we think that you should save the 5 people. If you're in a situation where you can say, do you want 49% of the population to be happy or do you want 51% of the population to be happy? We are saying that you should choose the 51% because that is what is maximizing happiness and maximizing us in our ability to fulfill our purpose in life. Now I will be talking about whether or not you should be using this idea of a categorical imperative. They say that any action should act like a rule. So if I lie to my debate partner, that means that I should always lie for the rest of my life. However, you shouldn't use the categorical imperative because the categorical imperative is never practical. Everybody here can say that lying is bad. However, we can never say that lying is never bad because under the categorical imperative, if you say that if you don't lie because you think lying is bad, you're also saying that if a serial killer comes to your door, you shouldn't lie about where your friend is hiding when the serial killer asks where your friend is and tells you that they're going to kill them. We can see that not all murder is unjust. If you kill somebody to save the entire world, that is not unjust. If you kill somebody because they're going to kill you first, that is not unjust. But we can also see that not all murder is just. Killing an innocent person isn't just, and we agree to this. However, from what you can conclude from what I'm saying is that you can never have a categorical imperative. Nothing is always one thing or another, so you just shouldn't be evaluating this in the round. We are not arguing that you should always push people off bridges. We are saying that in this particular scenario, pushing Morgan is a good idea. Pushing Morgan is a good idea because by killing one person, you are saving 3 people's lives. That is 2 more people than who would have been saved otherwise. So when you take a step back, you should be thinking about who saves the most lives, who maximizes happiness. And by saving 2 people that wouldn't otherwise be alive if it wasn't for pushing Morgan, you are maximizing happiness. You are maximizing these people's ability to have experiences and move through life and alter other people's lives for the better. You are allowing these people to grow up and be with their families for the rest of their life. You're allowing these people to fulfill their career goals. You're allowing these people to fall in love and make beautiful families. And you are allowing more people to do this. If all of these things are good, if having families, if fulfilling your goals, if being happy in life, if all of these things are good things, then you should be working to make sure that it happens to the most people. You shouldn't be depriving 3 people of having these experiences simply because of some categorical imperative that doesn't have any practical application. You should be maximizing the amount of people who are able to be happy in life, maximizing the amount of people that are going to be able to hug their mom just one more time. You need to maximize this when you vote in this round. So for all these reasons, I urge a government ballot. Thank you.
Good debate.
And are we going to get the ballot in the email?
I did see an email.
I think we use the same link to the previous link to submit the results. So what's the room number for this one?
42, right?
42?
Room 1.
Okay, thanks. I submitted my result.
I did my result.
Yeah, I've also submitted.
Brahman,
Yeah, shall I go first? I'll just make it short. It was a very good day. It was very hard to pick, the winner because both the teams debated well. But I just wanted to give a small, if you read actually the topic, there's one thing I think like both the parties missed. It's like Finley, Harley, and Riley are tied to the tracks. They didn't say that they're working on the track. So there's a difference between they say that these three are working in the tracks or they're tied to the track. So the first, the governing side said that all the people are equal. So just by the topic itself, they're actually not equal because three are tied, they're not working, and the other person is, something like a normal person. So, and I felt, both the teams, the governing side, they kind of a little contradictory. The first speaker said they're equal, but the second speaker said they're not equal. Somehow the opposition side I felt like they were not able to, defend that equality side of it. So considering all the debates, it's a very tough call. I'm going with the governing side for the win.
yeah, as Anu said, the tying is tricky in the topic wise. These three people are tied, and the assumption is it can be go both directions. But government side, they did very good, and they consider, according to me, they consider all are equal, and that's what they debated all the time. And it's very tough decision for judges and as well as for you guys. I'm pretty sure to taking one side, because if killing one person is not good, and same time saving three people is important as well. So it's very tough, and you both teams very good. I'm voting for government side. So my vote goes to government. Good luck for next rounds.
Thank you. I will go last. So I also agree that topic itself is very difficult topic. Looks very simple, innocent, but both side of the teams, they did their best. They brought a lot of aspects of different points and different values out of those points, that why one action is better than another one. But I felt a little different than other judges. Next side, they made a very strong point about moral absolute, and that's why I'm voting for them. Other points were a little weaker for me because they were getting washed with each other's argument. But on the moral absolute, I did not find any strong argument from government side. So I voted for next side. Thank you.
Good job, everybody. I expected a split decision. I think it was really good debate.
Yeah, good to you guys. I mean, good luck in your next rounds.
You're gonna beat them in settings, okay?
Yeah.
I've actually ever seen. Like, you're really, really good.
Did you hear that? Can you hear him?
Yeah, kind of.
Okay, good.
You're a fantastic team.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
fantastic.